So how do I design my practices? Welcome as always to My Tennis Coaching and My Tennis Coaching on YouTube. In today's presentation, I am going to show how I actually design my practices, how I construct my practices, what thought goes into it, and I'm going to showcase how I designed a practice a few weeks back. The presentation is pre-recorded. It was filmed and recorded a few weeks back as part of my Tennis Coach Academy community monthly meetups. Every single month, all the coaches get together and we discuss a topic. This topic is about how I design my practices. If you'd like to join the community, please check out the link down below and enjoy the presentation.
So just before we get into the presentation itself, just a couple of sort of, not disclaimers as such, but just a couple of points that I'd like to make. I think it's really important to understand what I'm going to share with you today is sort of my process for my players. And I've gone a bit of a coaching reflection over the past couple of months. And I think especially when we're looking at the constraint-led approach and ecological dynamics, it's very hard to copy and paste it because the stuff that I'm going to show you today with a player was designed around him at his stage and age and what he was going through within matches. And I think sometimes as coaches working in coach education this week, I've done 2 coach workshops. I've seen 60 coaches, and the vast majority of coaches, all they want is drills. They just want what to coach. So I think it's important to understand that this is my process with my players. It may not work for you. And it's a common thing that I felt as a coach when I do a coach education workshop. I'd go away to a to a workshop. I'll see these amazing drills. I'll take them back to the club, and they just wouldn't work. And I couldn't work out why. And it's because they weren't designed for my players. And it's just not a copy and paste exercise coaching. That's something that I've came to realize, especially over the last 18 months. And I know it's a bit weird because I've released books and stuff like that with games in or practice designs in. And what I want you to really think about is just use them as inspiration today. And this is my process, and it's working for my players at the moment. And hopefully the idea is it will be an inspiration for you of, okay, how you can design your practices that are a bit more efficient and effective around your players. And this is sort of something that I've got written on my wall in the office now. It's how to coach is more important than what to coach. And for those of you who are in the Coach Academy, you probably see a lot of changes within the content going forwards. It's going to be much more about, okay, how we can be better coaches, not in terms of these are the drills that work, because again, it might not work for you. So that's just a little bit of a disclaimer as such. But let's get into it. So we're going to look at building confidence moving forwards and using a constraint-led approach. And I'm going to take you through my step-by-step process. So when I sit down every day and think about my lessons coming up in the evening, this is the framework that I sit down with. These are the sort of the questions that I have on my sort of my desktop, and I will go through each one. So everything starts with an intention. Okay, what do I want to get the player to explore? Then I move on to constraints, and I'll go through each of these in more detail as we go forwards. And I'm hoping that most of you follow me on social media or you are members of the Academy, so you are familiar with some of the phrases. I've tried to make this presentation a little bit light on the academic phrases and stuff. But how do I set up constraints? So how do I set up the practices to generate affordances? So affordances are opportunities for action. So they'll link into the intention. What's the purpose of the practice? How does it tie into where my player is? How does it tie into what the player needs and wants at this moment? What are the consequences of the practice as well? Is it representative? So does it look and feel like tennis? And if you are in the UK, that phrase gets used a lot by the national governing body with LTA youth, and a big challenge for me as well. Doesn't look and feel like tennis. Like the more it looks and feels like tennis, the more it transfers hopefully onto the match court. So is it representative? Does it allow repetition without repetition? So are the players achieving the same outcome but finding multiple different ways? Does it offer variability and instability? So am I constantly challenging the player as the practice goes forwards? And what's my role? And it's interesting when you go down the ecological dynamics route and constraint-led approach route, the role of the coach massively changes. And I think we'll talk about this as we go through. It's less about me telling the player what to do but to design the practice environment so they can explore and find their own ways how to do it as well. So that's my process. They're the questions that I have written down, and I fill them in for every single session. And we're going to sort of talk through each one now as we go forwards. So what I want us to explore, and that's the question that I put forwards on my practice design, because I want the players to explore certain things. And you'll notice in the couple of bullet points in a few seconds, it's not very specific. It's still quite open and quite general, because I want it to be certain areas that I want the player to go after. I found when I first started this approach, if it was too specific, I was almost constraining to constrain, which means I was directing them towards something that I want them to go after. Whereas now I sort of set up a situation where I want to set an environment where there's a theme, an intention, but I want the player to just sort of have free range of how they navigate that. So with this player in particular, which I'm going to share with you today, it was all about confidence going forwards. So a little bit of context, the player is 9. They're playing under 10, so green level tennis, plays to a regional, just low national level here in the UK. With green level tennis, a lot of it, because of the constraints, the demands of the court's big, the ball's quick, the player in question is quite small. He gets a tendency to get pushed quite far back behind the baseline. But the player's got unbelievable hands. He's really, really talented with his hands. He's got great drop shot, great volley. So I want him to have more confidence moving forwards. So that was the first thing that I wanted to explore, trying to get him to move forwards up the court more, not get pushed back as much as he was in match play. And I want to try and get him to think about controlling the court. And the practice that we set up was to try and get his opponent to hit through the middle of the court. So if he came forward and he approached and took control of the net or the front of the court, could he get his opponent to hit through the middle? And then it's just about, okay, well, how can I create game environments, game scenarios where the player can develop their confidence and then try and control the middle? And that's what I set out with. So if you do follow me or you are part of the academy, you'll know that I'm big on behaviors. So this one was all about confidence, building their confidence to move forwards. And again, it's quite tough at green because of the demands of the ball, because of the court size. There's physical constraints on the player as well in terms of his height and his size and his speed. He's not the most athletic player. However, he's pretty good at approaching. He hits a pretty good ball going forwards, and he's pretty talented with his hands as well. So I wanted him to sort of continue to develop that confidence going forwards. The issue with green tennis, especially, is because there's very limited sort of short balls, because especially in the UK, there's a lot of moon balling, a lot of high rally ball, the LTA love to call it here, and it pushes the opponent back. The player was quite successful at Orange going forwards and got to a national level at Orange because he kept going forwards and was quite proactive and quite aggressive with his net play. So I want to keep that element of it at green, even though it's a bit of a struggle for him at the moment, because hopefully that's going to sort of translate a little bit more when he goes into sort of full ball tennis and he hits puberty and he hopefully grows a little bit as well. So that's what I want him to explore. So the first thing I think about, okay, well, what constraints do I need to set up? So I've got my theme. I want him to come forward. I want him to build confidence. So what constraints can I set up for the player to help him develop that, help him understand that, help him go after that? So the first one is a task constraint. So a task constraint is the rules or the regulations of the game. It's the practice itself. So I want the player to be encouraged to come forwards. So I want him to try and get in and past the service line when he sees the opportunity. So again, it's not about me telling him when to move forwards. Like classic example is, okay, if I give you a short ball, move in behind it. If you hit a high loopy topspin ball, move in behind it, serve volley. So I'm not telling him when to move in. Again, the art of designing these practices is to encourage the players where to look, but not tell them what to see. So that's the first thing that I'm thinking about. Okay, how can I get him in past the service line when he sees the opportunity? Then I think about, okay, well, how can I manipulate the environment then to encourage that? So the idea I had with this practice was to use throwdown lines. So when the player moves past the service line, I can't hit in between the throwdown lines, and you'll see it in the clip in a few seconds. So I've put two rows of throwdown lines up, and I'm not allowed to hit outside the throwdown lines. So hopefully, one of the biggest issues with this player was he was scared to come forwards because he was scared of getting passed or lobbed. So by reducing the size of the court when he comes forwards, I'm hopefully making him feel a bit more comfortable to come forwards. So that's how I manipulated the environment. And the individual constraint is quite tough with individual constraints. But I was trying to find a pace that matches the player's skill level. So you probably see in the clip, I do my best under 10 impression when I'm playing. So I'm trying to play as much as I can as a 10-year-old. One of the biggest issues I have with private lessons, especially, and this is a private lesson, like I can't make it completely realistic and representative because I'm not a 10-year-old. And the big issue that I see with a lot of coaches within the individual constraints, we set up these practices and then we play like a 41-year-old tennis coach, and we're smashing the ball past them, and that literally has a massive effect on their confidence. So the individual constraint there was more for me. So I was trying to constrain myself and play like a 10-year-old. So I tried to match the player's level. So that's the original setup, and I'm going to play a clip now of how it looks, and then I'll talk you through the other steps as well. So this is how it looks before I play the clip. So you can see here, I'm down the far end. The player's going to be down this end. I'm going to serve. We're going to play the point out. The intention for the player is they can win the point from the front or the back. But the affordance that I've opened up to the player, the opportunity, if they get past the service line, I can't hit outside the throwdown lines. So I have a smaller target hit into, and you probably notice on my side, I've got throwdown lines in there as well. So I can do the same. I think it's really important when we set up these practices that we have both sides playing this similar thing, because again, we want that cause and effect. We want that consequence. So if he gives me an opportunity to come forwards, I should be able to have the same rules as well. So that's the general idea. And I've got clips of the player going through the first stage of the practice, and you'll see him try different things out. But let's just have a little look at how it plays. Me. So you can see that the player wants to get forwards, and he tries to go forwards off a quite a deep ball, which probably wasn't the best intention. And then I'm looking at, okay, where did he hit the ball as well? So he hit the ball directly back to me, and that then created the opportunity or the affordance for me to literally just go right past him as he came forwards. So when you set up these practices and designs, this is quite common. The first couple of sort of minutes, the players trying to find ways, and there's loads of errors and there's loads of mistakes. But that's the initial design. So we've got the task constraints in terms of the player. Well, I want the player to try and move forwards. That's the affordance that I want him to look after. We've got the environmental constraints. So if he does come forwards, I can't hit past the outside lines. And the same with me on the far side. And then the individual constraint is I'm trying my best here to play like a 10-year-old. So now I've got the original sort of, or the base practice. I then think about, okay, I need to make sure it's got a purpose and consequence. So why moving forward matters. I mentioned before that when players get to green, they stop coming forwards as much. The ball's quicker, court's bigger, ball bounces higher. They haven't physically grown that much between orange and green either. So they stop coming forward as much. And if you look at the pro game at the moment, like it's very much an all court game. Players need to be quite comfortable in all situations, especially up and towards the net. At the French Open last year, a lot of the top juniors serve volume coming forward quite a lot, even on clay. So I think it's really important that, especially, again, this is all my opinion, but when we're developing these under 10, under 12 players, that we develop a 360 player where they're comfortable all over the courts. Again, one of my biggest criticisms of the national governing body here in the UK is they're all baseliners. It's all serve and forehand. It's all about winning points from the back of the court. You look around the world, most of the best players now are comfortable everywhere. So I'm trying to even at under 10 when things are going against him from a from a physical point of view with the court and the ball and his own physical constraints to keep getting him to come forwards because he's pretty handy forwards. So we're making success is defined of how confidently, how confident and how consistently he moves forwards. And you'll see with this player that he doesn't lack confidence as such coming forwards. And one of the biggest issues we have, and you'll see it in the clips, is he just comes forwards all the time. So a big part of this lesson was trying to get him to recognize the correct affordance, when was good for him to move forwards. If he fails to move forwards, and obviously I've got free reign as well. And it's interesting with the lines, and we'll touch upon this in it's a little bit later on in the presentation, but the lines are quite towards the inside tram line. It's almost like an orange court. We could manipulate the lines and make it bigger or smaller as well to make it more inviting for him to come forwards. But with the player in question, he probably just needed just that little nudge with the lines. And you'll see in the clips that he learns pretty quickly. So on that first clip, he tries to approach off a really deep ball, and he approaches back down the center and gets punished as well. And again, in this situation, I'm not telling him that's a bad choice. He knows it because of the consequence. He knows he's probably hasn't picked the right idea because I've gone past him quite quick. So again, goes back to the role of the coach. I'm not telling him that wasn't a good choice. I'm just letting the game itself dictate to him, and he's trying to find ways now in which to win. And you can see now as the clip goes on, he starts to definitely explore different other options as well. I'll say I was definitely moving like a 41-year-old and not so much like a 10-year-old. But you see that, so he approaches from the back again on that one, but he goes down the line, so he goes into my backhand, and he gets a bit more success. So again, I'm not going to share the whole lesson. I'm pretty sure the full lesson is on the academy as a masterclass where I talk through the whole lesson. But you can already see him. He's learning from the previous one. So the previous one, he went back to the middle. This one, he's gone a little bit lower, a little bit quicker to the backhand. So the clips that I'm going to show in between, I'm just breaking up the step by step. It doesn't sort of correlate to the previous slide, if that makes sense. So the third thing that I looked at on my little checklist when I'm designing this is, okay, is it representative? And I think straight away, does it look and feel like tennis? I'm pretty sure yes, because it's a tiebreak. We're playing tiebreak points, so the serve does return. You don't have to come forwards. So again, one of the biggest mistakes I made when I first started coaching this approach was, okay, I'll feed in the short ball, you move forwards behind it. The issue with that is I'm taking away the opportunity. I'm taking away the player's ability to read the environment, to see the affordance, to see the opportunity. So I'm not just telling him when to move forwards, and I'm not just giving him the ball to move forwards on. It's quite open, it's quite dynamic. And the way I'd probably set this up in a match, I've just put this here to sort of help coaches out, is the warm-up. Okay, I just want the player to encourage. So we may put a task constraint in where you can only win the point if you move forwards. So if one of the players move forwards and goes past the service line, then the point's live. If both players stay back, then the point's dead. So in the warm-up, it's still competitive. It's not like we just rally for 10, 15 minutes. It's okay, we're going to play points. The point's only live if one of us unlock the point by getting past the service line. And that's the first game we've done. I've not put it in the slide just because of time. But the warm-up, I want to see, okay, when does the player come forwards? What information are they using to come forwards? How do they come forwards? And how successful they are. And then the main practice is what we've put in there. Okay, once the player moves forwards, I can't hit outside those lines. And like, I try and make it as realistic as possible. Because again, that looks and feels like tennis. There's a serve, there's a return. You don't have to come forwards. There's no clear guidance of when to move forwards. Going back to what I said a few seconds ago, like a lot of coaches would just feed in the short ball, and then the player attacks a short ball, then you play the point out. But I want the player to recognize when to move forwards, but then also to recognize when they're effective at moving forwards. And you've seen it in the first two clips. The first one, he goes middle on the approach, gets no success. then he goes line to the backhand and gets some more success as well. So any practices that I design and set up, I'm always thinking, okay, is it like a match? Obviously, we don't have lines in the match as well, so there's some elements there that definitely aren't real. But that's where the constraints come in to try and guide or shape the player to making more and better decisions. So we're going to move on a little bit now, and you can start to see that he starts to mix it up a little bit more now. It wasn't out because he wasn't past the service line before I passed him. So you can see there that he's trying now serve volley. So we'll talk about this in a few seconds, but now he starts to get the repetition about repetition. He's trying to find multiple ways to come in. And the player in question here is really, really clever game sense wise. He's a very clever tennis player. And he's not afraid of trying out multiple things. But you can see that he is now, okay, he's adapting. He's trying to find multiple ways to come in, which brings me nicely onto repetition without repetition. So if you're not familiar with this Bernstein quote or phrase, repetition without repetition. So repetition without repetition means having the same outcome but finding multiple different ways. Now, in a normal context, it might be, okay, hitting a forehand cross court, but finding different ways with your movement or your technique to do it. In this scenario of the player, I want him to find multiple ways to come forwards. And you can see it already. He's approached centre, he's approached down the line. He's now starting to serve volley. Interestingly, that again, if you look at the last clip, he serves out wide to my forehand, and I pass him quite easily cross, and his serve wasn't that effective really. So you'll see in a later clip that he will change that as well. But that's what repetition without repetition means. So when I set up these practices, I want them to try and find different ways. And there's a couple of ways in which you can do this as a coach as well. If you're in a group, just rotate the players. That's one of the best ways to get repetition without repetition. Because if you keep changing the player, you then give the opposite player, the opponent, multiple different variations. So if you play against me, I'm pretty good at forehands and I'm pretty good at coming forwards. But then if you play against someone else, if you play against Ollie, who's on the call, Ollie might be really strong with a backhand and might not come forwards as much. So by mixing the players around more, that brings in great repetition without repetition. And that's a really important statement to make towards parents as well. Like there's a reason why we need slightly mixed ability groups, because we need that variability. We need that repetition without repetition. If everyone played the same way and had the same strengths, then we don't get the variability. One thing that we could do as well, which unfortunately I've not got on the clip because we didn't get round to it in the session that we filmed, we could adjust the target area. So once he starts to get success, I want to, and I'll talk about this in a few minutes, I want to destabilize him. I don't want him to keep getting success. So we could make the target area bigger on his side. So one thing that we did actually in that session a bit later on is, okay, we made the gap bigger. So I could have the tram lines or he could have the tram lines. We could also set the throwdown lines up. So if I wanted to sort of encourage him to go more to the backhand side, we could move the lines across the court to encourage him to get the ball to come back across the angle from the backhand corner. So we could change the width of the target as well. So again, I want to keep things fresh. One biggest mistake I made, I think with constraint-led coaching when I first started, was I'd let the practice run on too long. I wouldn't change it up. And this practice that I filmed here maybe 6 months ago, so I'd let it run too long. I didn't mix it up enough. And if you follow Transforming Basketball and Alex Sharama on Instagram, he's really good. And he talks about like constantly changing the practice to keep it fresh, to bring in more variability and repetition about repetition. So I would definitely mix up the target area a little bit more. And one thing I thought about actually writing this presentation, which I'm going to try out this week, is I'll change the ball speeds. Now you're thinking, well, how can I change the ball speed? Well, I might start using some orange balls with him. So an orange ball is going to be slower. So he's going to have to be probably more precise when he comes forwards, because I'm going to have a bit more time to sort of try and get the ball past him. We may potentially use some yellow balls as well. So I might change the ball that he uses and maybe give him a mix of tennis balls. And that's going to then bring in some more variation as well of how he approaches and plays. So just a couple of easy ways in which you can bring lots of variation to your practice. And even if you're working with beginners or entry-level players, hit and giggle, I called him, like mix up the ball. Like I use quite a lot now with reds. We use a little bit of sponge and then we bring the felt ball out. Or if the slightly older reds, we'll get them playing on a red plus court. We'll make the court bigger or we'll make the court smaller. So I'm constantly changing the environment, whether it be the court size of the ball, to get more of this repetition without repetition. And you can see now that the player starts to really fully adapt. So he starts winning. So again, if you think back to the last serve volley one that he did, he went to the forehand. Now he's decided to go out wide to the backhand. He gets a nicer return. So the player, again, over the course of the clip or the course of the lesson, you can see that it's not just short ball move in and volley. It's not just repetition with repetition. He's finding multiple different solutions. And that's where the variability and instability come in. So by bringing in some unpredictability, I'm trying to encourage more forward movement. So again, vary the target to challenge players. So we talked about it just before, like change the court size. So one thing that we did in that lesson, which I've not got on the clip because I'm just conscious of time, when he moved forwards, I allowed him to have tram lines in on his side later on. So that gave him more options in terms of, okay, where's he going to hit that first volley? So if he gets past the service line, he's got a bit more options there. Or if he's going to finish the volley, he's got more space to go into. Because one thing that I found during the session, especially with the player, was his first volley tended to come back towards me. And in a real match situation, I'm probably going to lob him straight away or pass him straight away. That's interesting because most under 10s won't lob. And that's why you see in the clip there that I'm trying to pass him. So mix up the court size as well. Again, just giving him something different to think about. You could bring in some time pressure as well. So you could bring in, okay, a little bit of pressure of him moving forwards. I'm not a big fan of saying you've got to get inside a certain number of shots because I think that takes away the scanning or the reading for the affordance, looking for the opportunity to move forwards. But you may play a timed game where, okay, I don't know, X amount of points, 3 points if you come in and volley past the service line and win the point, and you're playing for a variable time limit. Because what I want is sort of add some pressure as well to the practice. Doesn't have to be time pressure. Again, I mentioned a few moments ago, you may change the court size on his side or the player's side and make that a bit more challenging as well. But I want to bring in some instability. So once they start to get some success, we start to bring in some challenge to the player as well. I'm just going to sort of wrap up now of sort of what the coach's role is, and then I'll open the floor up to some questions. I think it's really important in this way of coaching and designing the practice of what the role is. My role is not to tell the player what to do. And I see my role as guiding the player towards the problem solving. And unfortunately, in the clip, I'm not mic'd up. If you go into the academy, there's quite a lot of sessions where I am mic'd up, and you can see how I do this within the academy. I'll try and guide the player. I mentioned it before. I think our role is not to tell the player what to see, but where to look. So I'm pretty much guiding the player. I use a lot of what I call react questions to help players react on their movement. So at the end of each go, whether he's successful or not, there's a couple of questions that I might notice. Okay, what did you notice when you moved forwards past the service line? What encouraged you to move forwards? What did you see in the environment that made you think, yes, I'm going to move forwards on that ball? When you did move forwards, why did you hit your forehand straight down the middle? What invited you to go to the backhand corner? Because I think it's really important as coaches that we need to understand that we don't know what the player sees. And I think sometimes if I use that example of short ball volley, like we don't know if that's the right ball for the player to move in, but we set it up as a coach of, okay, this is the ball you're going to move in because I think what's best for you. And I'm an experienced and knowledgeable coach. And we don't know. Like the player in question there is what, 9? I've no recollection what it was like to be a 9-year-old. A 9-year-old sees the world differently than me as a 41-year-old. the player themselves see the world differently because they're dealing with their own emotions, they're dealing with their own physical capabilities and their skill level. And I had this debate all the time. I had it last night with a coach on court, like telling players to approach on specific balls is backwards thinking, because Federer could possibly smack a winner from 4 feet behind the baseline. But then I'm probably going to trade or rally back cross court or neutralize back cross court from the same type of ball. But Federer will hit a winner. Murray probably hit a drop shot. So I think sometimes when we set these practices up, it's just guiding the player, and that's where the questions come in as well. So again, how did you control the point when you move forwards? So when you move forwards, where did the first volley go? Did it work? What sort of influences did it have on the game? And really try and encourage them to think about, okay, what do they see in the environment? What was the attraction to move forwards on certain types of balls? And again, things that I guide players towards it's not ball characteristics as such. And again, if you're a UK coach, you know that the national governing body is obsessed with ball characteristics. But it could be your opponent's position. It could be the previous shot you hit. So if I hit a really good penetrating forehand that pushes you deep and really breaks your contact, I may start to come forwards because I'm going to anticipate or see the affordance of possibly a shorter ball. So it might be the shot that you hit before. It might be your court position. It might be the ball characteristics. It might be the score. So I think just getting the players to think a little bit more about their environment around them and the information that they can use to move forwards as well. And that's a lot of the stuff that I did with the player in the clip. And that's it. So that's my process, my 6-step process. I've tried to break up a little bit of clips. I know there's been a lot of talking and stuff as well. But that's how I go through setting up a practice design. It's very much a case of having a clear intention, making sure I have a clear purpose of the activity. What do I want the player to explore? What constraints can I put in place? So how can I manipulate the task, the game, the rules? How can I manipulate the environment? How can I manipulate the player? And in this case, it was more about manipulating myself as the coach. And that might be a little bit of environmental constraint as well. And then I'm looking at key things like, does it offer repetition without repetition? Does it offer the right affordances that I want the player to go after? So an affordance is an opportunity to action. Is there room for variability? So can I manipulate the practice quite quickly and get a different look and feel? Is there scope to bring some instability to the practice? So once the player starts to achieve success, can I destabilize the player and try and get them to find something different, try and find a different solution? So when I design all the practices that you see in the academy, in my practice designs and my practice videos, this is the process that I go through. And it's an evolving process as well. It's something that I've sort of been playing around with for a long time. And it's definitely not refined, and I'm probably still going to change it as well. But hopefully you'll see that there's quite a lot that goes into it. And one of the biggest criticisms that I get as a coach, especially with coaches I work with, is I just play games. Like, people will just see that game and think, oh, Steve's just playing one of his crazy games again. But you can see with the constraint-led approach, there's a lot going on there with that player. There's a lot of setup from the coach's point of view as well. And the player probably doesn't know half the stuff that's going in sort of in the background as well. And I think with constraint-led approach, there's a great quote. I can't remember where I got it from. I think it might have been Stuart Armstrong, but constraint-led coaching is more about being hands-off in terms of, we're not telling the player how to do it, but I'm definitely eyes on, where I'm looking at how the player's interacting with the constraints and interacting with the game. And then I'm manipulating the environment, or I'm manipulating the task to try and get a more efficient and effective behavior. Or if they're being really successful, can I destabilize the player as well? So I'm just going to wrap up and I'll open it up to some questions as well. So key takeaways from this very short presentation: try and develop confidence through forward movement. Moving forwards encourages players to control confidence. Sorry, my things there. Let's see. Confidence in the match. So again, the whole idea of the practice is to get him to move forwards in a match situation, to get him to stop getting pushed back behind the baseline. So again, I'm looking at the competition environment, and then I'm trying to get him to practice stuff in the practice environment that's hopefully going to transfer onto the match court. By using the constraint-led approach, players explore and learn. And again, if you were to watch the full lesson, you'll see that there's lots of mistakes, there's lots of errors, there's lots of tough moments where it looks like it doesn't work. And it's allowing the player to go through that. And it's a safe space. And a big thing that I push on my players is you're going to make mistakes because you need mistakes to learn. Your body needs to make mistakes to start adapting and finding more efficient and effective ways. And I think sometimes as coaches, we just get too scared to do that. We're too scared because what our peers or fellow coaches may think. We're too scared of the player losing confidence because they're not getting success instantly. Too scared of the parents looking at the lesson and seeing all these errors and thinking we don't know what we do. But you could see in the very few clips that I shared that the player starts to find a way themselves. I'm not sort of guiding them and I'm forcing them into it as well. And just before we open the floor up, I have just literally put together a new online course. So it's called From Drills to Skills. So pardon me while I do a shameless plug for a couple of minutes. The idea is to help coaches like yourselves make your practices a bit more representative, make them more realistic to the game itself. And I've already shown you today that one example of a practice that I designed to stop the short ball volley drill. And it's transform repetitive drills into game ready skills. We'll go through more about constraint-led approach. So the course really dives into what constraints are. So what is a task constraint? What is an environmental constraint? What is a player constraint? Bringing an awareness to them. I also showcase a lot of examples of how I manipulate those three constraints as well and the effect it has on players. Make the practices more match-like. One of the biggest criticisms I have of my early coaching and most tennis coaches is our practice environments aren't realistic. I say it all the time. We almost teach ballet and then the players are in a mixed martial arts fight. Tennis lessons are too regimented. They're too structured. They're too obvious. It's just the same thing. It's lots of repetition with repetition. So the course really looks at, okay, how can you make your practices more realistic, make them more representative? And a big part of the course is it builds upon your existing coaching knowledge and coaching skills. So one thing I would say is you don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You don't have to change your mindset straight away. What you can do is look at these isolated repetition with repetition drills and just some slight tweaks to one of the three constraints can make a huge difference as well. And that's a big part of the course. It's okay, giving you ideas of how you can manipulate the games that you use today and just make them a little bit more representative and hopefully a more efficient and effective for the player. And then there's quite a lot of practical stuff as well. So a big part of the course is I give you tasks to perform at the club. So after each module, there's a little quick win, I call it, and you have a little task which you can take to your club that day and just change something, change a task, change the environment, change a player constraint, and then see the impact as well. Inside the course itself, there's 12 step-by-step modules. So they're video-based webinar modules, very similar to this. Lots of examples of practices as well with real players in real situations. And the whole idea is to enhance player development because, again, if you make more and better players, it makes you more successful. It makes your business more successful as well. And there's lots of exclusive downloadable resources and there's peer-to-peer feedback. So we've set up a community group within the academy as well. And a big part of the course, if you want to, it is optional. You can upload a video of one of your practices that you've manipulated and get peer-to-peer feedback because that's how we learn. I think sometimes tennis coaches were so scared to share ideas. We're so scared of what people think, or we're so scared of giving away the secret sauce. So one thing that I've tried to do with this course is to sort of break down that barrier and share ideas because, again, I've not got all the answers. There's elements, even watching those clips back now, I look back and go, oh, I literally could have done that a little bit better. I could have changed it. Mentioned one before. I could have manipulated the size of the area a little bit quicker as well. So again, I think that's a huge part of the course is the peer-to-peer feedback and opportunities to learn. So the course goes live on the 1st of November. It is $60. So what's that? £51, I think, in English pounds. Not too sure on euros. Apologies. But you can get 50% off. So there's a code MTC email. If you scan the QR code now, it will take you through to the sales page. Sales page is not public, so you'll be the first people to see it. If you are an Academy member already, it's free. The full course is up in the Academy library. So yeah, that's the new course. And again, the idea is just to try and break down the barriers. And constraint-led coaching can be quite overwhelming at times because it's quite academic. I'm 4 years in. I'm by no way an expert in it. And there's a couple of coaches on the call today who have been using this as well, and they probably will look at some of the stuff and go, "Oh, I can make that a little bit better." And that's what I want the community to be. I want it to be a sharing community. Tennis coaches don't share. It's weird. It's crazy. So part of the course is to try and, one, make tennis coaching more representative, two, break down the barriers of peer-to-peer learning. So if you are interested, again, there's no pressure whatsoever, but there's an email there, and you get 50% off as well. So you get it for $30, which I think is like 19 pound. I think Great British pounds. My conversion rates are not the best at the top of my head. And that's it. So that's the end of the presentation. It went a little bit longer, as always. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to allow you, if you have any questions, if you want to stick them in the chat, that would be absolutely great. Or if you want to raise your hand, I should be able to unmute you or turn your camera on if you want. But yeah, we've got 10 minutes. So if you have any questions, that will be absolutely amazing. And I can stop talking to myself. So I'll leave it open to the floor. This is where tennis coaches go very quiet. I did 2 coach workshops this week, so 60 tennis coaches, full-time tennis coaches. And when you ask tennis coaches to do a demonstration, no one steps forward. I find that fascinating. Oh, here we go. Ollie's got one. Hi, I'll read it out. So, how do you marry variability with realism? Where's the line? E.g., encourage your player to volley tram lines in. Yeah, it's a really good point, to be honest. Like in a match, tram lines aren't in. I fully understand that as well. The way I look at it is I'm trying to develop the skill of the player. So I'm trying to get the player to find spaces away from me. So I think I mentioned in the presentation, the issue I had with the player in that lesson was the volleys were pretty much coming towards me. So I wanted him to have a bit more freedom and a bit more space and give him the option to maybe use a tram line. So by giving him the tram lines, I'm almost like giving him the affordance of, yeah, go wider, go towards the trams. I understand that's not real. And yeah, the trade-off is I'm developing skill. So hopefully in a match, he's not going to volley to the tram line because he'll know in a match he can't hit tram lines. But what I'm hoping is he'll see the affordance of going to the space. He'll see the opportunity for action. And that's something that I really try quite hard to put forward to the parents. There's a great one with the serve where I get the player to serve into a full court. And that's completely not realistic, but I'm trying to develop racket head speed. So a lot of it is educating the parents on that as well. But yeah, so I know it's not real, but I'm hoping that when the player gets into a match situation, they'll know the task constraints of the match. They'll know they can't hit out. So I'm hoping they'll self-organize. So again, I don't want to go too academic here, but self-organize means the body will just act to what it perceives and what the intention is. Great question. Vlad, no problem. Yeah, no problem. You've got to jump on court. That's absolutely fine. So do you let choose players? Yeah, absolutely. So great question there. Do I let the player change the constraints? 100%. So I might set the base constraints up. And if the player's struggling, I'll just say to them, well, how do you want to change it? Like, how do you want to change the practice? And like the player in question there may say, well, he might want to make the space smaller on his side. Fine. Might want to make it bigger. The player in question that we looked at today, he really enjoyed 2-touch stuff. He liked doing 2-touch to control it. So sometimes he liked the second touch. So he could look up and look at the environment to see the affordances, to see the opportunities. So the players at the start won't, but the more they start to manipulate the constraints themselves, the more they get it from it. Another question from Ollie. My first coach encouraged you to serve full court in points and everyone else serving guns in the box. Yeah, of course. So that's a classic one. So by freeing up the environment, the perception of only having a box to go into, you end up actually performing the outcome anyway. So I like that. Yes, Frank, it is recorded. So I will send everyone the link. So there was 40 coaches registered. So I will send the link to it. And I'll send the link out to you via email so you can watch it back and you can share it with people as well if you want to share it, if there's any value in there as well. So another question, choose where to serve from. Yeah, so classic one, serve from. Did this quite last night with my oranges. So I've got a group of red players just gone to orange, struggling to serve from the orange baseline. Fine, just you can pick where to serve from so they can go a little bit closer. Again, it's just having that conversation with players. And to steal something from Rob Gray had a great podcast out. I need to find the link, I'll send it. But he talks about the 75% rule. Like, you want 75% success. Any more than that, you got to manipulate the constraints. Any less than that, you got to manipulate the constraints. So that's what I tend to go with. It's okay, if the play is in and around 75% success, then I've probably got the constraints right. If they go up any higher or lower, then I'll start to change the constraints quite a lot. But I reckon now, the lesson I did last night with a player, I changed the constraints maybe 6-7 times in an hour. We were constantly changing it, making it either more demanding or making it a little bit more attainable. But yeah, players should have full control, I think, over the constraints. I think sometimes we put in there what we would like to see. Very good questions. I like it. We've got a couple more minutes if there's any further questions. We're going to be quiet. That's good. I think one thing I would encourage if you're in the academy is start to use that community page. As always, tennis coaches don't want to communicate. They don't want to share ideas. But like, if you can put practice designs in the community, and again, people can just, one, see good practice and great practice, and two, they may also see something a little bit different and sort of give you an idea. Like, I did a practice this week with a coach. And he did something really, really good, and I'll just steal it and make it my own. That's how I made a living. So yeah, okay, I'm going to start wrapping it up. Listen, thanks so much for those of you who joined live. If you are watching the recording, please feel free, if you have any questions and stuff, please, either if you're inside the Coach Academy, just send me a message on there and I can get back to you direct. If you're not inside the Coach Academy, why not? But never mind. Just email me, steve@mytenniscoaching.com. Thank you so much for joining us. I'll send you the link to this as well, so you can watch it back if you want, and enjoy the best day. Enjoy the rest of your day. Think about constraining those practices, make them more representative, and I'll see you all soon. Thanks very much.